brother's dinner table. It wasn't the steak knife that cut deep. It was my son calling me useless. Name's Harlan Quaid. 56, an internal controller who knows the smell of hickory BBQ better than boardroom perfume. My father's brass pocket watch sat heavy in my palm that night, before it cracked. Ever been blindsided like that? It wasn't the steak knife that cut me that night. It was my own son's voice. We were halfway through the ribs Dean had smoked all afternoon, the kind of meal he liked to brag about as award-winning backyard BBQ. Evan was chewing with the speed of someone in a hurry to speak, his eyes darting between me and my younger brother at the head of the table. Then he said it clear, casual, like a fact in a weather report. Dad's just the office guy, useless in the real work. The words didn't echo so much as settle over the table like a wet blanket smothering whatever lightness had been there a moment ago. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. Dean's smirked eyes flicking to mine as if we'd both heard the punchline to a joke only he had told. Across from me, Mara reached for the pitcher of iced tea topping off my glass without meeting my gaze. The hickory-smoked sweetness in the air, once inviting, now clung too heavily. My jaw ached from holding back a reply. I could feel the grain of the dining chair's arm under my fingers, grounding myself in the small details. Outside, the porch light hummed faintly against the late autumn dark. Dean leaned back, speaking as if nothing had been said. "You know, Harlan, we might need to speed up deliveries for that Air Force project. Deadlines are deadlines, right?" The words were light, even playful, but the tone snagged somewhere inside me. I set down my fork. My father's old brass pocket watch, always in my hand when I needed something solid, slipped from my palm. It struck the hardwood floor with a sound far sharper than it should have made, the kind of sound that makes everyone pause without knowing why. I bent down, fingers brushing the cool brass, and saw the thin crack spidering across the glass face. For a moment, I held it there in my palm, watching the second hand tick its small, stubborn circle. Then I closed the lid. The click was louder in my head than Evan's words had been. I slid the watch into my pocket, the cracked glass pressing lightly against my leg, like a reminder I hadn't asked for. Conversation resumed in that careful way people do, after something awkward, slightly too loud, slightly too cheerful. Evan asked Dean about that big delivery next month, his voice warm with curiosity. Dean answered like a man who'd been waiting for the question, launching into talk of streamlining processes and getting the brass what they need ahead of schedule. I kept my eyes on my plate, cutting another piece of meat I no longer tasted. Mara cleared plates with a quiet efficiency, her bracelets clinking softly. She refilled my water again, still not looking at me as if acknowledging the moment would make it worse. I caught a faint whiff of BBQ smoke from her sweater as she passed behind me, comforting and stifling all at once. Dean's laughter rose over the table, rich and pleased. "Sometimes you have to cut a few corners to keep the machine running," he said, tossing me a look that felt heavier than it should. I raised my eyes to meet his, steady and unblinking. The watch in my pocket seemed to tick louder, even though I knew it couldn't. That was when I realized the evening's real damage wasn't the crack in the glass. It was the one running straight through the middle of my family. You don't give away the keys to your own shop unless you think it'll keep the peace. I can still see the afternoon in 2010 when I slid the CEO nameplate across the desk to Dean. The office smelled faintly of cutting oil drifting up from the shop floor, a scent I'd always thought of as the heartbeat of the business. Outside the glass wall, Metal lathes hummed and clinked, turning raw steel into the parts that had kept us solvent through 2 recessions. I told myself I was making room for the younger man's ideas. In truth, I was tired of the fights at Sunday dinners. Dean leaned forward to pick up the nameplate, his grin quick and almost boyish. "You won't regret this," he said. His handshake was firm, but there was an edge of relief in it. Beside him, the company lawyer, retained under the guise of neutral facilitation, adjusted his tie and shuffled the paperwork. His eyes lingering on Dean a touch too long. I noticed it, but said nothing. Family harmony was worth more than a few bruises to the ego. Or so I thought. In those early months, I told myself the transition was smooth. Dean handled the contracts and glad-handing. I moved into internal controller duties, combing through ledgers, ensuring compliance, tracking quarterly reports. It was honest work, but the door to strategy meetings closed more often in my face. At first, I told myself it was efficiency. Later, I stopped making excuses. The shop changed under Dean. The hum of the lathes was joined by the shrill beep of barcode scanners. New machines, a faster rhythm on the floor. The break room, once a place for shop talk over burnt coffee, now had a flat screen showing promotional videos on a loop. My old ceramic mug, the one with HQ CEO printed in blue block letters, ended up on my desk filled with ballpoint pens. A quiet joke, maybe. Or a reminder. This morning, as I settled into my chair, I was wading through invoices when an email notification blinked onto my screen. From PTA Dayton Technical High, the subject line read, "Volunteer Confirmation, Evan Quaid." My finger hovered over the mouse. The body of the message thanked Evan for signing up to assist with Dean's Community Innovation Program, complete with a bright logo and a list of weekend workshops. I read it twice before it landed in me my son had chosen Dean's project to give his time to not mine. I leaned back, looking at the framed photo on the wall of a much younger me standing beside the first CNC machine we'd ever bought. My expression in that picture was all optimism, the belief that every choice I made was building something secure for my family. But somewhere along the way, the foundation shifted under my feet. I printed the PTA email, blue ink bleeding slightly where the cartridge was low, and set it beside my keyboard. My eyes kept returning to the words Dean's Program, the letters heavier each time I saw them. The murmur from the shop floor floated up through the air vent, a sound I used to find reassuring. Now it felt distant, like a radio station just out of range. That's when the inbox pinged again. Internal QA step skip approve before Friday. The subject line was short, but it dropped like a weight in my stomach. The quiet part of me that always counted before speaking began its tally. 1, 2, 3. And I knew the ground had shifted more than I'd admitted. The numbers don't lie. People do. That was the thought in my head as I scrolled through the audit logs, the blue-white light from the monitor washing the rest of the office in a cold tint. Somewhere down the hall, the copier hummed like it had been doing since sunrise, and the mug of coffee by my elbow had gone lukewarm enough to leave an oily sheen on top. Then I saw it, a scheduled email timestamped 3:00 a.m., instructing a skip of final inspection on Project Delta 17. Project code Delta 17. I didn't need to look it up to know it matched the upcoming delivery Dean had been bragging about at last month's staff meeting, the one with the brass arriving in person for the handoff. One of those brass, I recalled, was a retired Air Force General, Leona Stroud, coming in as some kind of consultant. A shadow stretched across my desk. "You look like you're chewing glass," Leona said, her voice as even as the pressed creases in her blazer. She was taller than I'd expected with that straight-backed carriage the military seems to stamp into people for life. Her eyes flicked to the screen, then back to me. I clicked the window closed. Just numbers, I said, keeping my tone flat. Her smile was small, almost polite. Numbers tell stories. The trick is whether you listen. She tapped the edge of my desk twice, then asked if I'd join her for lunch. We ended up at a diner 3 blocks away, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and a counter stacked with pies under glass domes. The air smelled of fried onions and something sweeter, maybe pie crust still cooling in the kitchen. I wrapped my hands around the sweating glass of Coke she ordered for me, condensation running down my fingers. She leaned across the table, her voice dropping. Silence is a form of consent, Harlan. Don't be part of the cover-up. The words sat between us, heavier than the ketchup bottle by her elbow. I stared at the grill cook in the open kitchen, flipping patties with a rhythm that somehow felt steadier than the one in my own chest. I'm just looking, I said finally. Looking is fine, she replied, sliding her half-empty coffee toward the aisle as the waitress passed. But the clock's always ticking, even if you pretend it's not. Back at my desk, the afternoon light had gone gray, filtered through the half-closed blinds. I pulled open the top drawer looking for a pen, and instead, my fingers brushed paper. On top was my most recent 401k statement. The numbers circled in my own red pen from weeks ago. Beneath it, the folded tuition bill for Evan's spring semester, the ink smudged where my thumb had lingered. Both stared back at me like a ledger of what I stood to lose. The copier's hum faded into the background until I couldn't hear it at all. I turned back to my monitor and opened the log again. The email's timestamp 3:00 a.m. sat there like a challenge. I pulled the machine usage record, scrolling until my eyes locked on it. The entry for Delta 17 time matched to the minute. My finger tapped the desk, twice, a habit I didn't know I'd picked up from Leona, and I sat back in my chair. The match was perfect. Evidence has a way of showing up when you least want to see it. It was just after 7 on a Monday morning, the kind of early March day when the Ohio winter seems determined to prove it's not done yet. The bay doors were open to let in a military truck, and the wind carried in a thin mist of frost that stung my cheeks. I stood just inside the threshold coat, zipped to the neck, watching a pallet get loaded into the truck bed. From here, even through the grain of the live feed on my tablet, I could see the parts were wrong edges, not finished, weld seams jagged under the fresh paint. Out of spec, no question. I switched the feed to playback, rewinding to a clearer angle. There, in the corner of the frame, was Dean's voice off camera, but unmistakable, telling the dock foreman, "Move it out, no delays." The foreman nodded once, glancing toward the military driver who stayed in the cab engine, idling diesel fumes rolling in steady puffs into the cold air. I closed the tablet with more care than I felt my breath visible in short clouds. Back in my office, I slid into the chair, the heating vent groaning faintly as it pushed out lukewarm air. On my desk, my father's brass pocket watch lay where I'd left it Friday evening, its cracked glass catching the blue glow from my monitor. The tick-tock was uneven now, a subtle hitch every few seconds that made it feel less like a metronome and more like a countdown. I cued the footage again this time, recording it straight onto a USB drive. The progress bar crawled across the screen, every pixel of it slower than it needed to be. My fingers drummed lightly on the desk, not from impatience, but to keep from looking toward the hallway. When the copy finished, I yanked the drive free, the faint, static shock making me flinch. That's when Dean appeared in the doorway, leaning one shoulder against the frame like a man in no hurry. "Morning," he said, scanning the room. "Seen anything unusual?" The question was casual, but his eyes weren't. They drifted to the watch on my desk, lingering just a beat too long before coming back to my face. I shook my head, making sure my voice carried the right weight of boredom. Just the usual. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Good. Let's keep it that way." Then he was gone, footsteps fading toward the front office. I slipped the USB drive into my pocket, feeling its hard edge through the fabric. The watch ticked again, offbeat, uneven, like it knew something I didn't. Outside, the diesel smell still clung in the air, mingling with the faint tang of frost. I turned back to my monitor, pulling up my calendar without thinking. 2 weeks from today, in bold black letters, delivery ceremony, 10 Sawyers a.m., top brass in attendance. I sat back in the chair, the drive warm from my hand, and realized I had just enough time to decide which side of this thing I was going to stand on. Deadlines don't usually come with a moral test attached. The notice hit my inbox at 11:37 p.m., just when I was considering calling it a night. The delivery date had been moved up by 3 days, less time to act, less time to breathe. The screen's glow painted the walls in cold light. The rest of the office swallowed in shadow, except for the warm cone spilling from my desk lamp. Outside the window, the parking lot was an empty sheet of asphalt under the security lights, each pool of yellow haloed by April's mist. Leona's words from the diner threaded through my head again. Temporary gains have permanent consequences. I could hear the clink of her spoon against the coffee mug, as if she were in the room now. I pulled the cracked watch closer to the keyboard, its brass warm from sitting under the lamp. The tick was still uneven, like it skipped a beat every time I hesitated. The smell of burnt coffee drifted up from the mug I'd reheated twice already. Bitter and metallic. I started with the email schedule's dozens of auto-generated notices and dispatch slips from the past 6 months. The timestamps told their own story. Inspection steps removed signatures missing from fields that had been mandatory until last year. I cross-referenced them with the machine usage logs, flipping between screens until my eyes blurred. The mismatched times matched too well with the shipping records. A text buzzed in from the QA assistant. "Got a sec to check part ID 7738. I typed back. "Pull the original PO cross-check with physical label in the yard." A pause. Then mislabeled. "Specs don't match." That was the piece I needed. I opened the dock video from last week, froze the frame where the foreman waved the truck forward. Dean's voice again buried under the hum of the idling engine. "Move it out. No delays." I stitched the footage together with the logs, the purchase orders, the inspection protocols. The cursor blinked in the file name field as I saved the whole set, my thumb hesitating over the enter key. The secure phone rang a low, coded buzz. Harlan Leona's voice came through clear but edged. "If you're going to send it, send everything. Half a truth won't hold up." "I've got it all," I said, eyes on the file icon. She exhaled, not quite relief. "Then don't wait for permission." I encrypted the package, adding 2 layers of password protection, and routed it to the Air Force Quality Office's secure drop. The status bar inched forward, while the heater hummed in the corner, pumping out stale warmth. The watch ticked on each uneven beat, landing in my chest. When the upload finished, the screen blinked, received and acknowledged. A few seconds later, a secure reply appeared in plain text. Stay put. Await contact. I leaned back, rubbing my eyes. The room felt smaller now, like the walls had moved in a fraction. The hum of the heater was the only sound until my phone vibrated hard against the desk. The caller ID lit up Dean. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. His voice was low, almost calm. You just signed your own death warrant, brother. The line went dead. If you ever want to disappear, sit in the back row. That's what I told myself as I slipped into the last seat along the wall, half hidden behind a column in the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force. The ceiling arched high overhead, a blue-gray sky held up by steel trusses, aircraft suspended in silent formation above us. The terrazzo floor gleamed like still water, and the air smelled faintly of machine oil and polished wood from the display cases. In the far corner, under a soft spotlight, sat the project crate. It was sealed, stenciled in regulation black letters, an artifact in waiting. To most in the audience, it was a symbol of accomplishment. To me, it was proof that something had almost gone very wrong and that it had been stopped. The stage lights washed everything in a pale glow. Dean was up there center stage in a tailored suit, with a tie just a shade too loud for the occasion. He shook hands with a row of dignitaries, each grip punctuated by his signature beam of a smile. From where I sat, I could see the faint sheen of sweat on his temple, though the room was cool. I kept my hands folded in my lap, feeling the weight of the cracked brass watch in my pocket. Its uneven tick seemed to sync with the click of camera shutters going off near the front. Evan sat 2 rows ahead, his phone angled discreetly as he recorded Dean's handshake with the serving general. Then the general stepped to the podium, his posture rigid, but voice warm. This contract represents not only an achievement of engineering, but of integrity, he began. The words rolled through the cavernous hall, carrying an authority that didn't need to be raised. And today, I want to thank the individual who safeguarded that integrity when it was most at risk. My gaze dropped to the floor, tracing the flecks in the polished surface. He wasn't talking about me, he couldn't be. I had done my part in the shadows where things like this are meant to stay. But then, in a move that seemed choreographed by some invisible hand, the general stepped away from the podium. His polished shoes clicked softly against the floor as he descended the stage steps. The crowd's heads turned in sequence, following him like a ripple across water. He came to a stop directly in front of me. For a heartbeat, the entire hall seemed to hold its breath. And then he saluted. A crisp, precise motion, his eyes locked on mine. The applause started somewhere near the stage and spread like a tide, filling the space until it echoed off the aircraft overhead. I felt the heat rise in my face, unsure where to look. Dean's smile was still fixed in place, but it had gone brittle at the edges like paint left too long in the sun. Evan's jaw hung open, his phone forgotten in his lap. I rose halfway, unsure whether to return the salute or just shake the man's hand. My mouth was dry. The cracked watch ticked in my pocket, louder than the applause. Leona appeared at my side, her presence steady as ever. She leaned in, her voice low enough for only me to hear. "Come up here, Harlan." Time they knew the whole story. The applause swelled again, and I felt the weight of every step I was about to take. An apology feels different when it's overdue by a decade. I heard the creak of the side door before I saw them. Dean first, then Evan moving in a hesitant echo behind him. It was late on a Saturday afternoon, the shop floor quiet except for the distant hum of the old soda machine in the break room. Sunlight slanted through the dusty windows, turning the air into visible shafts where motes drifted lazily. Dean carried a small box in both hands, the way you'd hold something fragile. His suit jacket was gone. He wore a pale shirt rolled to the elbows, a look I hadn't seen since before he took the corner office. He didn't start with a joke or a greeting, just set the box down on the nearest workbench and slid it toward me. Inside, nestled in black felt, was my father's brass pocket watch. The glass face was whole again, no trace of the crack that had haunted its tick for months. The brass gleamed polished to a muted warmth. I picked it up and it fit into my palm like it always had, only lighter somehow. The faint scent of metal polish clung to it, mingling with the oil and dust of the shop. Dean cleared his throat. Figured it should be working if it's going to keep time. His voice was softer than I'd heard it in years. No edge, no defense. Evan lingered by the doorway, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. His hands were shoved into his pockets, but his gaze was steady when he finally spoke. I want to learn QA work, from the ground up, if you'll let me. I turned the watch over once, feeling the smoothness under my thumb. One condition, I said. Honesty above all else. No shortcuts. Not for contracts, not for convenience. If something's wrong, we fix it before it leaves this floor. For a moment, Dean's jaw tightened like he might push back. But then he nodded, slow and deliberate. Agreed. No counter-argument, no qualifiers. The sunlight caught the repaired glass as I slipped the watch back into my pocket. It ticked evenly now, each beat measured and sure. I reached into the folder on the bench and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The header bore the name of the vocational fund we'd launched in the wake of the ceremony. I signed at the bottom, authorizing the donation of the watch as part of the fund's display. It would sit in a glass case, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Evan stepped closer, curiosity flickering across his face. You're giving it away. Not giving it away, I said, folding the signed paper in half. Just letting it keep better time somewhere it can do some good. Legacies aren't about who gets the credit, they're about who carries the torch. The scent of new wood and floor wax met me the moment I stepped into the Dayton Technical Institute auditorium. Rows of folding chairs filled the space, their metal frames glinting under the stage lights. The chatter of students bounced off the high ceiling, bright, unfiltered, and full of that nervous energy that comes before something official. At center stage, just beneath the school's banner, stood a glass display case. Inside, on a small walnut pedestal, my father's brass pocket watch sat as if it had always belonged there. The repaired glass caught the light, sending a thin line of reflection across the front row. Beneath it, a small brass plaque read, "Integrity above all." Through the tall side window, I could see the silhouette of the Air Force Museum in the distance, its curved hangar roofs etched against the September sky. A reminder that history wasn't just behind us, it was beside us, watching. Leona took the podium first. Her voice carried the same calm authority she'd had that afternoon at the diner, the one that had cut through my hesitations. Some people make headlines, she said, scanning the audience, but there are others who keep the foundation strong so the building doesn't crumble. We honor both today. The students leaned forward, caught somewhere between admiration and curiosity. When it was my turn, I stepped up slowly, letting the moment breathe. The microphone hummed faintly. Most of the work that matters, I began, happens where no one's looking, fixing the small errors before they grow big, asking the question no one wants to answer, saying stop when everyone else says go. I kept it short. Stories are better when they leave a little room for the listener to step inside. I mentioned no names, no dates, just the quiet truth that unseen work often changes the course of things. Evan joined me on stage near the end, standing just to my right. He wasn't the same young man who'd thrown that word useless across the dinner table years before. His gaze was steady now, his jaw set in something closer to respect than challenge. He nodded at my last sentence, and his hand came to rest briefly on my shoulder. It was a small gesture, but it landed heavier than any applause. The audience clapped polite but warm, and as I stepped away from the microphone, I caught the glint of the watch under the lights one more time. I turned toward the window, letting my eyes rest on the distant outline of the museum. The sun was lowering, painting the hangars in amber. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't looking back or ahead, just here in the exact place I was meant to be. The afternoon light caught the watch's smooth glass as I stepped off the stage, its steady tick matching my own unhurried steps. For years its crack had mirrored the fault lines in my family, and my work now both had found their way to being mended. I've learned that truth spoken in time can heal more than it hurts, and that the work worth doing often leaves no signature but its results. Sometimes bridges collapse so we can learn which ones are worth rebuilding. If you've ever faced a moment where honesty cost you comfort, how did you choose? Share your story. I'd like to hear it.